I can't stop pacing. The old wooden floor creaks with every step, a constant reminder of how empty our house feels. The smell of burnt coffee hangs in the air. I forgot to turn off the machine again. Outside, the wind blows through the trees, making the colorful autumn leaves dance. My name's John Prescott. I'm 42, teach history at the local high school, and right now, I'm living every parent's worst nightmare. Our town, Pelham, is the kind of place you see on postcards. White picket fences, cute little shops, and a church so old it was around before America was even a country. Tourists love it here, especially in the fall when the trees turn all orange and red. But Pelham has its secrets. I should know. I've spent years studying our town's history. There are stories that don't make it into the guidebooks. Whispers about Blackwood Forest that surrounds us. Strange things have happened there over the years. I never thought my family would become part of those stories. John, my wife's voice snaps me out of my thoughts. Sarah stands in the doorway, looking like she hasn't slept in days. To be honest, neither of us has anything new. I shake my head. Not yet. The police chief said they're bringing in some expert from Boston, but I don't finish the sentence. We both know what I'm thinking. Sarah sits on the couch, clutching her phone like a lifeline. I keep expecting her to call or text. I sit next to her, putting my arm around her shoulders. For a moment, we're quiet, both lost in memories of our daughter. Emily on her first day of school, all smiles and pigtails. Emily winning the science fair, grinning from ear to ear. Emily last week, laughing at my terrible jokes. Emily yelling that she hated me before running out the door. I should have gone after her, I say quietly. Sarah squeezes my hand. We both thought she'd come back. She always did before, but not this time. Not after our stupid fight about a sleepover. Someone knocks on the door, making us both jump. I rush to open it, hoping against hope, but it's not Emily. It's Chief Parker, looking worried. John, Sarah, can I come in? We need to talk. In the kitchen, Sarah makes fresh coffee while I sit across from the chief. What's going on, Dave? I ask. Did you find something? He sighs, taking off his hat. Not exactly, but something's happened. You're not gonna like it? Sarah sets down 3 coffee mugs, her hand shaking a little. Just tell us. We've had to stop the search parties in Blackwood Forest, he says. What? Why? I'm on my feet before I know it. Chief Parker holds up a hand. Please, sit down. There's more. I sit, feeling like the room is spinning. Sarah grabs my hand under the table. 3 of our volunteers have gone missing. The chief continues. Just vanished, like Emily. My mouth goes dry. That's not possible. But even as I say it, I remember the old stories I've read. The ones about people disappearing in the forest. There's something else. Chief Parker says, his voice low. Something strange happened last night. We found someone wandering at the edge of town. Someone who went missing a long time ago. A chill runs down my spine. I think about the stories I've researched, about people coming back. Different. Suddenly, I feel dizzy. The kitchen seems to blur around me. For a split second, I think I hear Emily's voice, far away but clear. Daddy, where are you? Then everything snaps back to normal. The chief and Sarah are looking at me, worried. Are you okay? Sarah asks. I nod, but I'm not okay, because in that weird moment, I saw something. A dark cave, and Emily was there, smiling. But something wasn't right about her eyes. We need to go back to the forest, I say, my voice shaky but determined. Now, because whatever's happening in Blackwood Forest, whatever took my daughter, I have a feeling it's not over yet. The drive to Blackwood Forest is tense. Sarah sits beside me, her knuckles white as she grips the door handle. Chief Parker follows in his cruiser, lights flashing but sirens off. The last thing we need is to draw more attention. As we near the forest edge, I spot something moving in the shadows. I slam on the brakes, causing Sarah to lurch forward. John, what will she starts, but then she sees it too? A figure stands at the tree line, unnaturally still. It's a man, or what used to be a man. His skin is pale, almost translucent in the fading light. But it's his eyes that make my stomach churn. They're fixed on us, unblinking. Oh my God, Sarah whispers, her voice trembling. The man's head turns towards us, the movement is smooth, like a camera panning. For a moment, he just stares. Then, as if pulled by some invisible force, he begins to walk towards the road, towards town. His gait is odd, each step precisely the same length as the last. Chief Parker pulls up beside us, rolling down his window. Don't get out of the car, he warns. We've seen this before. They can't seem to enter the town limits. As if to prove his point, the man suddenly stops at the faded "Welcome to Pelham" sign. He sways on his feet, looking confused. What do you mean? Sarah asks. How many are there? The chief's expression is grim. We've counted 7 so far. All missing persons from the last few decades. I watch as the man paces along the invisible boundary, his movements becoming more agitated. What happens if they try to cross? You don't want to know, Parker says quietly. But as the words leave his mouth, a police car rounds the corner, lights blazing. The new officer must not have gotten the memo about our town's strange new residents. He pulls over and steps out, approaching the agitated man. Sir, are you all right? Do you need help? What happens next will haunt my nightmares for years to come. The moment the officer's hand crosses the town line, the changed man lets out a sound. Not quite a scream, not quite a word, but something in between. His body goes rigid, every muscle tensing at once. He lunges at the officer, his movements a blur. Chief Parker is out of his car in an instant, shouting warnings, but it's too late. The changed man is grappling with the officer, trying to drag him across the line. His strength seems inhuman, his fingers leaving bruises wherever they touch. It takes 3 of them to finally subdue the man, dragging him back into the forest where he immediately calms, becoming almost docile again. The officer is shaken but alive. As the paramedics check him over, I overhear him muttering, his skin ... It wasn't right, like touching a mannequin, but ... alive. I turn to Sarah, seeing my own horror reflected in her eyes. Emily, she whispers. John, what if? I grab her hand, squeezing perhaps too tightly. We don't know anything yet. Emily could still be okay. But deep down, a cold dread is settling in my stomach. Because I remember the stories now. Stories I dismissed as superstition and folklore. Stories of people returning from the forest changed, unable to rejoin society. What if those stories were true? What if whatever changed these people has my daughter? As twilight deepens, casting long shadows across the road, Chief Parker approaches our car. We can't go in tonight, he says, his voice heavy with regret. It's too dangerous in the dark. We'll start again at first light. I want to argue, to demand we go in now. Every moment we wait is another moment Emily is lost in that forest. But I know he's right. Blackwood Forest is treacherous enough in daylight. At night, it's a death trap. As we drive home, the trees seem to loom over us, branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. I can't shake the feeling that something is watching us from the darkness. That night, as Sarah finally falls into an uneasy sleep, I sit at my desk, poring over old town records. There has to be a pattern, some clue we've missed. My eyes burn with exhaustion, but every time I close them, I see Emily's face. Just as I'm about to give up, a name catches my eye. Elizabeth Proctor, age 9, missing for 3 days in 1793, found in a cave, eyes unseeing, speaking words not of this earth. My heart races, a cave, just like in my vision. Outside, a wolf howls, long and mournful. But underneath that familiar sound, I swear I hear something else. A high, keening wail that raises the hair on the back of my neck. It sounds almost ... human ... Dawn can't come soon enough. The forest looms before us, a wall of green and shadow. The morning mist clings to the ground, weaving between the trees like ghostly fingers. I take a deep breath, tasting the damp earth and decaying leaves on my tongue. Our search party is small. Just me, Sarah, Chief Parker, and 2 of his most trusted deputies. No one else wanted to risk entering Blackwood after what happened yesterday. Stay close, Parker warns as we step past the tree line. And whatever you do, don't lose sight of each other. The forest swallows us whole. The canopy above is so thick that it might as well be twilight down here. Our flashlights cut weak paths through the gloom. We walk for what feels like hours, calling Emily's name until our voices are hoarse. The forest seems to absorb the sound, muffling our cries. More than once, I swear I hear a response, a faint daddy, carried on the wind, but when we rush towards it, we find nothing. John, Sarah whispers, tugging on my sleeve. Look. At first, I don't see it. Then my eyes adjust, and I feel the blood drain from my face. Carved into a massive oak tree is a symbol, a spiral with strange, angular marks branching off it. It looks old, the edges worn smooth by time and weather. I've seen this before, I murmur, reaching out to trace the lines with my fingers. The bark feels unnaturally warm beneath my touch. Suddenly, a sharp pain lances through my head. I stumble back, spots dancing in my vision, a cave mouth, yawning wide in the hillside. Emily, sitting cross-legged at the entrance, smiling serenely, her eyes, somehow wrong, turning to look at me. Come find me, Daddy. I blink, and the vision is gone. Sarah is shaking me, her face pale with worry. John, what happened? I open my mouth to respond, but before I can, an unnatural silence falls over the forest. The constant background noise of birds and insects suddenly stops, leaving an eerie void. Chief Parker raises his gun, eyes darting between the trees. We should go back, he says, voice tight with fear. But I can't, not now. The cave, I gasp out. We need to find the cave. Sarah looks at me like I've lost my mind. Maybe I have. But I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that Emily is in that cave. We press on. Deeper into Blackwood, the trees seem to press closer, branches reaching out like claws. Twice more we experience that unnatural silence, each time lasting longer than before. Then, as we round a dense thicket, we see it. A hill rises before us, and at its base, a dark opening gapes like a wound in the earth. Emily, Sarah cries, starting forward. I grab her arm, holding her back, because there, sitting at the mouth of the cave, is our daughter. She looks just like she did the day she ran away. Same clothes, same messy ponytail. But when she turns to look at us, my heart stops. Her eyes are wrong, not white or glowing, but somehow off, as if they're focused on something just behind us, and her smile. It's too wide, too still, like a photograph rather than a living expression. You found me, she says, but her lips barely move. The voice seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Emily, I choke out, baby, are you okay? She tilts her head, the movement to smooth, like a puppet on strings. Okay, I'm wonderful, Daddy. I've never been better. I take a step forward, but Chief Parker grabs my shoulder. Wait, he hisses, something's not right. As if in response, Emily stands. Her movements are all wrong, too fluid, as if she's underwater. Don't you want to come see? She asks, gesturing to the cave behind her. It's beautiful in here. You'll never want to leave. Sarah lets out a choked sob beside me. I squeeze her hand, trying to project a confidence I don't feel. Emily, I say, fighting to keep my voice steady, we need you to come home now, please. For a moment, something flickers in those strange eyes, a flash of our real daughter. Then it's gone, replaced by an expression of serene blankness. Home, the word is flat, emotionless. I am home. She takes a step forward, and in that moment, I notice something that turns my blood to ice. Emily's feet don't quite touch the ground. She's hovering, ever so slightly, above the forest floor. My vision blurs. Tears or terror. I'm not sure which, because now we have a choice to make. Do we try to bring our daughter home, knowing what happened to the others who returned? Or do we leave her here, lost in whatever dark magic has taken hold of Blackwood Forest? As Emily takes another step towards us, moving in a way that's just slightly off, I realize with a sinking heart that we may not have a choice at all. The forest has her now, and it might not be willing to let her go. It's been 3 months since that day in Blackwood Forest. Life in Pelham has changed irrevocably. We've become a town of closed curtains and hushed whispers, eyes always darting to the tree line. Sometimes, in the pale light of dawn or the long shadows of dusk, we see her, Emily, or what used to be Emily, standing at the edge of town. She never crosses the invisible boundary, never tries to enter. She just watches. Her appearance is almost normal now, but there's always something off. Sometimes she stands still, not even swaying in the breeze. Other times, she moves in ways that defy natural motion, her limbs bending at impossible angles. But it's her eyes that haunt me most, blank and unseeing, yet somehow all-knowing. Sarah spends most days in bed, lost in a fog of grief and antidepressants. I've thrown myself into research, poring over ancient texts and folklore, desperate for answers. The government has set up a discreet research facility on the outskirts of town. Scientists and paranormal experts working around the clock to understand what's happening in Blackwood. We've learned some things. The symbol we found in the forest appears in obscure occult writings, linked to entities that exist outside our understanding of reality. There are legends of similar forests in other parts of the world, places where the veil between worlds is thin. But knowledge isn't enough. We need a way to reverse this, to bring Emily and the others back, to make them human again. Last week, one of the researchers managed to take a skin sample from one of the changed ones. Under the microscope, the cells were like nothing they'd ever seen before, constantly shifting and rearranging themselves. It's the first real breakthrough we've had. The town has changed too. People speak in whispers, afraid that talking too loudly about the forest might draw its attention. Children are kept indoors after dark. The school where I teach is half empty most days. Parents too afraid to let their kids out of sight. There have been more disappearances, not many, but enough to keep the fear alive. Each time, the pattern is the same. Someone ventures too close to the forest edge, and they're never seen again, at least, not as themselves. The changed ones, Emily included, have developed a routine. During the day, they retreat deep into the woods, but at night, they emerge, lining up along the town's border. They never try to cross, never speak. They just stand there, watching, waiting. For what? We don't know. Is it possible to save Emily? To undo whatever the forest did to her, I have to believe it is. Because the alternative, accepting that our daughter is gone forever, is too painful to bear. So, we keep working, keep searching, keep hoping. And every evening, I walk to the edge of town. I stand there as the sun sets, looking at the daughter who no longer recognizes me. Sometimes, I swear I see a flicker of recognition in those alien eyes, a ghost of the smile I used to know. I'm here, Emily, I whisper into the gathering darkness. And I'm not giving up on you, ever. As night falls and Emily retreats into the shadows of Blackwood, I turn back toward town. Tomorrow, we'll try again, we'll keep trying, no matter how long it takes, because somewhere in that forest, lost in whatever madness has taken hold of her, our daughter is waiting to be found, and I won't rest until we bring her home. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the wind carries strange whispers from the forest, I wonder, are we trying to save Emily? Or is Emily trying to change us? The forest is patient. It can wait ... and it's always hungry. I knew it was him from the cologne. It was always the cheap mall kiosk stuff. He swore you couldn't tell the difference. I never had the heart to tell him he was wrong. It was about 3 in the morning when I felt him get into bed with me. The king we used to share felt empty without him. I felt the bed shift. I felt someone nuzzle up close to me. I swear I heard him whisper into my ear. "Hey baby," he cooed. "I'm here now." I rolled over to kiss him. I needed this. Of course, there was nobody there. Jack had died 3 months ago in this apartment of a drug overdose. We met in our early 20s, me being a fresh young gay on Grindr, newly out of the closet and wondering why so many people wanted to party. Enter Jack, someone who had spent his time and left said party. He was more versed than me in life experience by a mile. Homeless at 16 by parents who wouldn't accept him, Jack fell into what most kicked-out gays do. A life of drugs and alcohol. He grew up fast, grew up hard, and was exposed to things a kid his age shouldn't have been. I'm not making excuses. He made a lot of bad choices too. A jail stint and court-ordered rehab set him straight. Thankfully, things were good, or so I had thought. 6 months ago, I noticed changes in him. He was run down, tired. He repeatedly said he couldn't sleep and had nightmares. I thought he was overworked. He had found himself a great construction gig and was fond of overtime. It helped keep his head on straight, he'd say. 3 months ago, I came back to our apartment to find him slouched over on our couch. His face was contorted into a scene of painful shock. I panicked. I don't know what happened next. My memories just flash a bit, like a slideshow after this. 911 was called. The doctors and coroners were stumped. All signs point to a heart attack. I overheard one EMT say sourly after I divulged Jack's drug history that the drug use finally caught up with him. True or not, I almost punched her in the face. Time stopped for me after that for a while. I had to put on the funeral. It was a lot for me. I felt like I was covered in molasses. I don't remember how it went. I think it was a small turnout, mostly coworkers, all very sympathetic of course. I can't remember much of that first month. I was too deep in my grief. I was struck with a fever twice. I could barely get out of bed. I'm sure it was a combination of the depression as well. That month was brutal. I couldn't find a reason to get out of bed most days. I started snapping out of it when the noises started. Bumps in the middle night, shuffling, doors closing and opening, footsteps. I wasn't sleeping most nights. I couldn't. The noises occurred with too much frequency to give me a respite. I thought I was going crazy until the night the bathroom faucet turned on. I shuffled out of the bed, groggy and half asleep. I got to the closed bathroom door and tried to open it. Locked. The light was on and something was casting a shadow. I knock, clear as day. I hear Jack's voice. "Hold on, babe. I'm almost done." I slam the door open. His toothbrush falls from midair to the ground. The sink turns off. There's a large thump behind me. I didn't sleep that night. Noises continued. Whispers. A few nights later is when he climbs into bed with me. I haven't told anyone about that yet. What would they say? It's grief. It will pass. You still feel him around you. I didn't want to hear that bullshit. I knew what I felt. He was in bed with me. The dreams came next, and that should have been my first warning in retrospect. They were so beautiful. Could you fault me? Put yourself in my shoes. They started out as memories of the good times he and I had together. The first date at a bowling alley, the first kiss at the drive-in theater. The times he knew I would hold dear to me. They were incredibly vivid. Then, he started addressing me, first briefly, not much, just vague feelings or concepts of conversations we had in those memories. Talking about the tiny things you never knew you'd miss talking about, like corn dogs from a county fair. I wasn't sure whether or not those conversations happened. They were always foggy memories of the best times, but they got increasingly more and more specific. Sleep got worse. If it wasn't Jack visiting my dreams, it was the noises he'd create at night. I began to feel ill again. One night, he came to me in a dream. He took my hand, looked me in the eye, and began to cry. "God, I've missed you," he sobbed. It was the first time he seemed to acknowledge what happened. He leaned, kissed me gently on the lips. He hugged me, and that cheap familiar cologne scent filled my nostrils. I felt a tear go down my cheek. I missed this. He leaned closed, and I felt his breath in my ear as he whispered the words that snapped me awake. "You should come with me." I woke up in a cold sweat. I could taste his lips on mine. The words and implications still lingered in my mind. I loved him. I was young and naive, sure, but he was my first. You remember that kind of love, right? I know now that life goes on, but during that time, for reasons I find out later, his words grabbed me. What was so good about being without him anyway? The noises persisted. He kept visiting, asking again for me to join him, the request getting heavier and heavier to ignore. I wanted to ask about what he meant, but I couldn't, or I guess didn't need to. I knew what it meant. I didn't want to admit it to myself at the time that it was a possibility. I barely slept. When I did, I wasn't rested. I felt like the Walking Dead already. Is that why I'm seeing Jack everywhere? I didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't want to hear their conventional wisdom bullshit about grief. The thing that concerned me the most was the sleepwalking. I never did it in the 32 years of my life, and suddenly it starts when my dead boyfriend decides to visit. Go figure. I'd wake up in precarious positions, never in deadly danger, but just enough for a wrong turn or a fall would break an arm. Things escalated one night. I would have died had it not been for Gravy. Jack was in my dreams again, where we're at the county fair. We were holding hands and staring dumbfounded in different ways at the rides put up the night before. Jack had always loved them. I think it helped speak to a bit of the risk-taker in him. He loved theme parks and roller coasters to death. I wouldn't dare. I was a notorious scaredy cat. He asked me why I wasn't smiling like I used to. He knew the answer. "I know you're tired and scared," he said, rubbing my hand with both of his. "But I need you to answer soon. I don't know much longer I can visit like this." It didn't occur to me that he may be doing this on borrowed time. My eyes land on the tilt-a-whirl nearby, and he clocks this. His face lights up. "Please, I don't know how much longer I'm here," he asks between yanking my hand towards the ride. "Give me this, just this, please." It's not that scary. I feel a yank on my hand and I take a step forward. I feel something dart between my legs, and the next thing I know I'm face planting in the street in the middle of night. I roll over, dazed, and my eyes turn to my savior. Not only 3 feet away was a small gray cat with specks of black all over him. He had what looked like a slightly torn right ear and let out what could have been the deepest meow I think I've ever heard from a cat. It sounded like the guy smoked a pack a day. He was thin, but not deathly thin. He either had a neighborhood root of friends to feed him or was an adept hunter. I heard the honk and instantly got out of the street just in time for a minivan to barrel down the road. I stared dumbfounded, registering the chain of events. I clearly sleptwalk into danger. This is bad. Did Jack lead me here? I felt my head get dizzy. The ball of fur that saved my life rubbed itself on my legs, purring. It snapped me back to reality. I looked down at him, and he looked back at me, expectedly. It was 3 a.m. I was tired. Everything felt heavy, but I looked down at this guy, and I knew not to fight it. I walked back to my place, and sure as a shit, he followed, meowing loudly and what sounded suspiciously cranky at the same time. I walked inside, and he followed instantly. I have a cat now. This is how these things happen. I've heard of the cat distribution system. In the dark of it all, I had a light, and his name was Gravy. He looked like gravy. Your pet name isn't any better. He was healthy as far as I could tell, neutered already, which meant he had experience with people, good or bad. He was skittish, but I knew that was to be expected. It's not my first cat rodeo. I had him set up with the proper kit within the next few days and his shot scheduled. Curiously, The one spot he reacted the most negatively to was the spot where Jack had died. He got on his haunches and hissed, but let it be. My brain didn't register the possibility as to why until later. Gravy was the thing that kept me going. He gave me a reason. He was just the right mixture of affectionate and cranky aloofness I needed in a cat. I needed Gravy because Jack wouldn't let up. The dreams took a more urgent tone. The first time he returned, I told him of my accident and he swore he didn't do anything. He said that his time was limited. I had to make my decision because he's getting pulled away somewhere, he claimed. We wouldn't be together unless I left with him before he got pulled. Nobody would love you like me. The noises got more frequent and violent. Gravy saved my sanity during those times. He'd register and clock them too, often reacting with a hiss and a growl and some curiosity. The noises were loud. Plates would shatter against the wall often. I didn't give a damn about setting up cameras to capture it. People would say I'm faking it anyways. The dreams got worse. The color would fade and Jack would appear with much more urgency each time. Sometimes, his face was slightly off, like his skin was stretched just a little too tight. The smell of his cologne became tinged with dirt and soil. He would exclaim, frightened, how his time was up. He could make it quick. He could help end things painlessly. He promised ... I couldn't answer. I later came to realize that if you're asked point blank if you want to die or not and you can't answer, you don't want to die. He paced in front of me, clearly agitated. This was the first time I've ever seen this version of him angry. It frightened me. I felt myself get warm. You chose a cat over me, he yelled. He took a few aggressive steps forward and grabbed my shoulders. I screamed. His hands burned my shoulders to the touch. He came close to my face and saw bits of bone exposed by his too tight facial skin. His breath made me gag. You will come with me. His jaw unhinged as if to swallow me whole, and I woke up screaming. I didn't startle Gravy, who was watching the side of the room, growling. His fur was up. He hissed at something, but I couldn't see what. I felt a wave of tiredness hit me like a brick and I fell asleep again. The second I closed my eyes, there's the smell. It's his cologne. I was dreaming. I knew it, but this wasn't like the others. The color was back. Things felt like the way they were supposed to be, not some strange hellscape uncanny valley. I was in a version of our bedroom from our earlier days, asleep. I was in bed, facing the wall, when I heard the door open. I felt the bed shift, much more weight than it'd be if it were Gravy. I felt fingertips along my back. His touch didn't burn like it did before. It felt electric. I got goosebumps. He breathed on the back of my neck and the hairs stood up. He lightly nibbled my ear. I knew in my heart that this wasn't real. I didn't care. I hadn't been touched since Jack. You don't realize how starved you are for touch until you got a plate of food in front of you. I pressed my back against him and I heard him laugh. He rolled on top of me and smiled. He was just as beautiful as the day I met him. He leaned down to kiss with me, such a passion I've never experienced. It took me by surprise how much I needed this moment. Maybe he was right. I felt the pressure in my temples. I felt my lungs begin to struggle as he forced his tongue down my throat. Part of me was screaming to fight back. It was drowned out by just how good it felt to be touched by him. It was comforting. My body began to spasm. I looked Jack in the eyes and saw that his pupils had turned jet black. I felt his tongue begin to swell in my throat as air became harder and harder to acquire. A long, guttural growl cut through the dream like a knife, a hiss. I felt Jack's weight shift. I heard him scream. Instantly, I snapped back awake. I was back in my normal bedroom, awake, still with something on me, but I'm not sure what. I couldn't register or understand what Gravy was doing floating on top of me. He was attacking something, that much was clear. He bit down hard on something, which roared out in pain. Flecks of brown ooze or liquid seemed to splash out of the bite wounds Gravy was inflicting on it, something connected with my jaw. It felt like a sledgehammer, and I fell off the bed and stumbled back up against the wall. I couldn't process what I was seeing. Gravy was clearly still attached to and attacking something in midair that clearly took up space, but I couldn't see it fully. He growled. I noticed some cuts on Gravy's stomach. Suddenly, Gravy was flung up against the wall, and I felt something cold and very strong grasp my neck and squeeze. Without missing a beat, Gravy was suddenly on the thing again. The grip let up on my neck and I gasped out for air. I heard a yowl, and suddenly Gravy was flung against the wall and held there. He thrashed out, but was stuck. Something was holding him. It was squeezing him to death. Whatever holding him was growing more and more visible from the cuts and gashes Gravy had been inflicting on it. Whatever illusions I had faded, Jack was killing my cat, and I was next. I felt a stream of urine go down my leg. I started to get dizzy. In that instant, Gravy made eye contact with me. His face became very strained, focused, and he meowed twice, and that snapped me into action. I thought about it later. I know this sounds crazy, but I know what I heard. Gravy spoke and said 2 words, "Not." Jack. Fight kicked in. I had little in the way of weapons, till my eyes fell upon a framed photo of Jack and I kept on my nightstand. I lunged for it and bring it down on my nightstand, shattering the glass cover. I grabbed the largest shard without even thinking, not registering the horrible cut I had until later. I lunged for the space between Gravy and me and jabbed the shard of glass into the air. It connects with a wet thud, spurting that same brown liquid into the air. Gravy falls to the ground. More bits of whatever was harassing us slowly begin to take form from the shard of glass until it becomes completely revealed. Whatever fight is in me absolutely flees at the rotting corpse in front of me. Dressed in the rotting clothes I buried Jack in, he growled at me. His dead, black eyes rolled around lifelessly in his skull. My eyes began to water at the smell, and this thing laughed at me, wheezing. It held the shard of glass in its hand, covered in its own ooze, and swiped at me. I held my forearm up just in time to catch the cut. Neither had noticed Gravy reposition himself between us. Completely visible now, the Jack thing lunged at me again. Before it could finish its swing, Gravy was on its throat. The force of the tackle took it by surprise, and it stumbled backward. Gravy tore and gnashed at the thing's throat, coating himself in the same gunk that poured out of it. Its rotting hands grabbed at Gravy to pull him away, but Gravy held strong. I didn't hesitate this time. I tore the shard of glass away from the thing and shoved it down the other side of its throat, back and forth. I felt the fire burn in my hand from the cuts of holding it tight, but adrenaline kicked in. I didn't care. All I cared about was working on the other side of this monster's neck while my cat got the other. The thing struggled, but we had the upper hand. I hacked away at rotting muscle and flesh until finally I felt it was good enough. I stood up and positioned myself above the thing and grabbed onto its temples. Any resemblance of Jack was gone. It was just a rotting mess of flesh now, roaring in pain. I didn't know if it'd work, but it felt right. I planted my knees on his shoulders and pulled its head away from his body with as much force as I could muster. It didn't require much force at all, and I overcompensated, landing on my butt against my nightstand, the lifeless head of the rotting corpse still in my hands. The thing's body thrashed less and less before it stopped. I held the head in my hands, feeling the activity slowly begin to die inside it too. I felt the familiar fur and purr against my legs, as Gravy nuzzled against me. "Good boy," I said. I dropped the head on the ground. I should have been surprised when it slowly turned to ash and began to crumble, but I don't think much would have surprised me anymore. The body slowly followed suit. I eyed Gravy, and then my own hand, and promptly decided on the hospital for both of us. Gravy required multiple stitches. I told the vets he protected me from a wild animal. Technically, I don't think I was wrong. He was bruised and beat up, but must have been a fighter. The vet claimed. She had no idea. I required stitches as well. My hands and forearms were pretty sliced up. I eagerly showed my stitches to Gravy the second I could. I'd like to think there was a bit of camaraderie there. He sniffed them and promptly showed me his butt and took a nap. I slept like a rock the night after. Any sort of physical unwellness was gone. The apartment was quiet, but I couldn't stay. Of course I couldn't. I had to move on. I couldn't hold on hope that there's even a fraction of Jack left. We moved out shortly after. One ghost was enough. Was it even a ghost? Did Gravy know I was in danger? Did he come to me specifically? Did I really hear Gravy speak English to me that night? I sat down and asked him. As crazy as it sounded, I sat Gravy on the kitchen table, and I asked him if he said not Jack that night. The air stunk, he farted, and hopped off the table. I left it at that. I know I feel safer with him around. This dumb cranky ball of fur saved my life twice. I did some research after that. I didn't realize that cats essentially domesticated themselves. I had known about how various cultures had cherished them as magical creatures, but pulling themselves out of the food chain by getting domesticated is crazy to me, unless they did it to protect us from things they can see that we can't. I don't like to think about it. I also don't like to think about the one door in my hallway Gravy always stops to hiss at when we come back from our walks. The neighbor who lives there is a female college student who lives alone, whom I've heard sobbing with surprising intensity often, to the point where I vitally wondered if something was wrong. Something felt wrong. I didn't want to admit it. I don't like to think about the rapid, familiar thumping I hear from her apartment sometimes. I don't like to think about this time Gravy stopped at the door and looked up at me to ask me with his eyes, "Hey, we doing this or what?" I took a step away from the door, but Gravy held firm. I eyed him. Nobody will believe me, but this sly bastard nodded at me. I took a deep breath, rolled my eyes, and knocked. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" It was all my fault, and it almost cost Felicia and I our lives. Our friend Sandy was having a house party, and we both wanted to go. Sandy threw the best parties, and they usually got pretty wild. The last one had been a real blowout, and we both had little more than foggy memories from it. Sandy was celebrating her graduation from nursing school, so we all knew that this one was going to be a serious rager before she had to settle in to pay student loans. Before we went, Felicia and I had agreed that one of us needed to stay sober so we could get home safely. "We don't want a repeat of last time," Felicia reminded me, and I nodded as I remembered how the Uber driver had tried to hold us captive until we agreed to invite him in. Running in heels is never fun, but we had managed it that night and beat him to the door of our apartment. So, we did rock, paper, scissors for it, went 10 out of 10, and I ended up with the loss. I wasn't happy about it, but I decided that I would do my best to stay sober so we could get home without having to get rides with creepy, hensy guys, be get murdered by a stranger, or see having to take a cab that neither of us could afford. We pulled up to the house, the party already in full swing, and I took a deep breath as I prepared to say no to temptation and be the best sober friend I could be. I lasted all of an hour at the party before I just couldn't hold out anymore. Someone handed me a drink, didn't even ask, and I drank it before I could think better of it. It was one of the very tasty screwdrivers I had seen going around, and I decided then and there that this would be the only one. I could still hold out. One drink wasn't going to get me. An hour after that, I was completely plastered, and Felicia was not pleased. She had decided to go all in, so now both of us were drunk and had no clue how we were going to get home. We took one look at each other, laughed, and said screw it. We drank way more than we should have that night and had a blast. We danced and drank and mingled our way through the party, and when Sandy waved us out around 2 a.m., we were basically holding each other up. I staggered to the car, but I couldn't even get the key in the door to unlock it, let alone drive. Felicia and I decided we would just walk home. It was 7 blocks from Sandy's house, but we had no chance of getting a cab this late, and the Ubers would all be weirdos at this point. Felicia agreed, but was basically dead weight 3 steps later. She was ready to sleep and certainly wasn't interested in walking 7 blocks. I was holding her up, looking for options as my own buzz wavered, when I saw a yellow cab parked at the corner. I got excited. It was a little late for cabs, but I wasn't about to question Providence. The light was still on, the guy in the front looking pretty awake, and I thought our luck might be turning around as we staggered toward it. I knocked on the window, and a guy with red hair snugged under a driving cab jumped as he turned to look at us. He was a big guy, big with fat instead of muscle, and he looked surprised but also delighted as he rolled the window down. He asked how he could help us, and I told him we needed a lift. He asked where we were going, and after telling him the address, I offered to give him a nice tip if he got us there safely with no weirdness. "Yes, ma'am, I believe I can manage that," he said with a big smile. "Hop in." So, we piled in the back. He turned off his light, and off we went. Felicia was asleep about the time we made the first turn, but I tried to stay awake to make sure the driver didn't try any funny business. We were from a pretty big city, and girls had been going missing pretty regularly lately. You read about it on Facebook all the time. They'd go out, get a little drunk, and then they'd never see them again. No one really knew what it was, but a lot of people thought it was a murder. It was scary to think about, but I felt a little safer being in a real cab rather than an Uber or some random guy. You never quite knew what the vetting process on Uber was, but I knew that cab companies had to do background checks on their drivers. So at least this fella was on the up and up. "You ladies coming from a club?" he asked, making small talk as he took his first left. "House party," I said, trying to be polite. Our friend was throwing a real heck of a get-together and we partied a little too hard. "I think, sounds like fun," he said with a laugh. "Looks like your friend had a little too much though." I laughed. "Yeah, she does that sometimes. I was supposed to stay sober so I could drive us home, but I'm not very good at it." He laughed. "Well, I guess it's a good thing for me." I made a non-committal noise and settled back. There was a little holder on the patrician with waters in it, and when I reached for one, I saw the cabbie turn to track my movement. He seemed interested in what I was doing, and I held up one of the waters and said that one of his fares must have left it behind. It was a shame, because my stomach was a little too full of alcohol and some water would have been nice. "Oh, those are for fares. I have a bunch in a cooler up here and I replace them as needed." "Help yourself," I thanked him, testing the seal to make sure it was sealed. It seemed to be, but I never got it open. The feel of the wheels beneath me was lulling me to sleep, and I was losing the fight. I tried to stay awake, but I was just too drunk. My eyes kept slipping shut and opening, and as I threatened to go under for good, I heard his phone ring. He picked it up, talking to someone on the other end, and it was like his whole personality changed. He spoke in a much different voice than he'd used with us, and gone was a jovial guy who had picked us up. Now he was gruff and kind of short with whoever he was talking to, and it seemed like a complete flip in personality. "Yeah, I got him. We'll be there soon." I started to ask what he meant by that, but before I could question the statement, I was unconscious. I don't know how long we were out, but I woke up suddenly and was unsure of where we were. I looked around, groggy and disoriented. Felicia was still sleeping beside me, dead to the world and not showing any signs of coming back, and the cabbie was still behind the wheel and driving us home. At least, I thought he was. I glanced out the window, no longer seeing tall buildings and concrete, and thought he must have taken a wrong turn. We were in the country. The buildings traded for rural pavement and shadowy houses. Everything was dark outside. No street lights this far out in the country, and I just watched it whiz by for a moment. I tried to make sense of it. I was confused, unsure how we had gotten so lost, and then I remembered the conversation before I passed out. "Yeah, I got him. We'll see you soon." Even in my drink-addled brain, I remembered those words. I glanced at the numbers on the dashboard clock and was surprised to see that we had been in the cab for over an hour. It shouldn't have taken that long to get home. 7 blocks would have been an easy drive this late at night, and as I tried to sit up, I felt something press against my wrist. The unopened water was a cool presence against my arm. I didn't remember opening it, and realized I must have fallen asleep before I could drink it. My vision swam as I tried to come upright, and I blinked quickly to clear it. Where? I tried, but my throat was dry. Where are we? The cabbie jumped a little, probably figuring had passed out like my friend, and when he looked over his shoulder I heard, again, the voice of that happy cabbie who had picked us up came out again. We're driving to your home. I tried to make his words make sense, but it was like wading through mush. This isn't right, I mumbled. I live in the city. You told me 175 Worth Street, he said, tapping his phone in the holder on the dash. No, I slurred, trying to make my head stop spinning. It was 751 Worthy Street. I put a hand to my mouth as the hot vomit threatened to come coursing up it. We were only 7 blocks from our house. He put a theatrical hand to his brow. Oh my gosh, I guess I put the address in wrong. Let me just find a place to turn around and we'll get you back on track. He started tapping at the phone, but I could see he wasn't hitting anything. I was suddenly wary, some of my intoxication ebbing as he put on a show of trying to get the address in right. I remembered those stories about girls going missing, and wondered if our names and faces would be on the news tomorrow. Would they think we just wandered off after drinking too much? Would they even look for us? He turned down a side road, saying he was going to turn around, but instead of turning around, he kept driving. I banged feebly at the glass that separated us, telling him he was going the wrong way, but I was so weak. I felt very dehydrated, my mouth dry and my head spinning. I reached for the water, but I thought better of it. I didn't want anything he might give me, and as the top came off, I squeezed it against the little holes that allowed us to hear him. He jumped and cursed, turning around to glower at me as the voice from the phone came back again. You stupid bitch, I hope you keep that energy when they get you. They'll teach some manners. My blood ran cold at that, and I let the empty water bottle fall as I looked for other options. I tried the doors, but the child locks were on and I couldn't get it open. I started to panic. I kicked at the door, at the glass, but each kick was more feeble than the last. I was starting to feel like I might pass out again. The cabbie laughed, telling me about all the terrible things the people he was taking me to would do, and my vision was swimming with tears. I bent over and puked in the floorboard, some of my vision clearing up as I purged the liquor, but it also left me feeling weak and unsteady. I banged my head against the glass as we finally came to a halt, and I went shakily to the window to see where we were. We were not, miraculously, in front of my apartment, the whole thing a dream or a hallucination, but in a vacant lot down some country back road. At the end of the vacant lot, perched like a gargoyle, was a white van waiting for us to arrive. As we sat idling, the doors came open and shadowy men started getting out. I felt my blood run cold as they walked toward us, stopping halfway between as if waiting for the cabbie. I thought again about my car sitting in front of Sandy's house, about how I could have just driven us home if I had stayed sober. Looks like we've reached your destination, said the cabbie, turning around to flash me a big creepy grin as he slid his seat belt off. Don't go anywhere, I'll be right back. And he hopped out to go talk to them. I shook Felicia, trying to wake her up, but she was little more than dead weight. They would get her, and they would get me in my current weakened condition. I couldn't fight them off. I could barely keep my head up, and I cried bitter tears in the back of that cab. If I was lucky, maybe they'd just kill us, but I doubted it. We were both likely to end up in some overseas brothel or on the streets of South America, and either prospect sounded grim. The cabbie shook hands with one of the shadow people, pointing back to the cab and likely telling them he had a couple of half-drunk girls ready for transport. We were in the middle of nowhere. There was no chance anyone was coming to help us. We'd be heading wherever in no time, gone and forgotten, never to be seen again, and there was nothing to be done about it. It appeared, however, that someone had other ideas. They had started walking toward the cab when lights suddenly lit up the back glass. Cars suddenly began pulling up, vans and undercover cars, and the people came out of them with guns drawn. The men in the headlights of the cab put their hands up, and as they surrounded them, they had them cuffed and collared pretty quickly. They took the men away, and that was when they seemed to realize that they had people in the back of the cab. They helped us get somewhere safe so they could get us checked out, and I'm pretty sure Felicia never woke up through the whole thing. They kept assuring us that we were okay, that we were safe, but all I could do was cry. I felt like I had been plucked from the brink at the last minute, and I thanked them with every breath I had. That was how I was almost trafficked by some gang or organization or another. The cops told us the less we know the better, and I agreed. I haven't drank since then, and now I'm the permanent designated driver for our group. I take friends of friends home too, sometimes intoxicated women we've met that night, just to make sure no one has to go through what I went through.